Netcasts you love.
From people you trust.
This is Twit.
Bandwidth for Maxwell's House is brought to you by CacheFly at CacheFly.com. This is Maxwell's House, episode 57 for January 29th, 2010. Monitor your color. It's time for Maxwell's House, the show that covers anything that's on the mind of this great man, Ray Maxwell. He is a polymath, and I hope you don't think that's an insult, Ray. A man who knows a lot about many things, whether it's piloting a glider to how the mind creates color. Ray is just the king of everything, and so it's always great to have somebody on who could talk about any subject. Usually on this show, we kind of focus on, I would say, more scientific subjects. Great to have you, Ray.
It's good to be here, Leo. I enjoyed the extended coverage yesterday of the iPad.
Ray was here and part of the team that helped us with our team coverage of this. And
right.
In general, I think it sounded like, it's funny. I wanted to get international people on. You're, of course, in Canada, because I knew that one of the things that was for sure true is that this would be U.S. only initially.
Right.
So I knew that anybody coming on from, let's say, British Columbia might be a little miffed. Would you like one of these?
Yes, in the long run, I would. For several reasons. One, I read a lot.
Yeah, it seems to me a great reading device. Although a lot of people are saying that they don't think an LCD is a good choice. They prefer e-ink.
Well, I don't know. I'd have to try them side by side for several hours and see. But I look at LCDs all day long, and they keep getting better and better. And
in fact, this is a technology that you're familiar with, I'm sure, because high-end LCDs contain this IPS technology, which gives you really good brightness, really good edge-to-edge color and brightness, and it's LED backlit, which I think gives you a nice, steady image. There's no flickering in this image at all.
Right.
I only held it for and read with it for a little bit, but I thought the experience was much more book-like than the Kindle. I never liked the Kindle. I think it's too low contrast. This is a much higher contrast screen, and I didn't notice any flicker. So I think I'm going to prefer it, but again, we won't know till it comes out and you have more time with it.
Right. Well, I already read some things on my iPhone. So
there you go.
I think this is going to be the same thing, only better. So and what I would really like is I would like access to magazines. If I can read Scientific American, Skeptic magazine, Skepticality, that's an iPod.
Well, you could do both. You could do both. That's the point.
Yeah, exactly.
You know what? I love it. This from point of view of an alternative medium, this kind of breaks down that barrier. The New York Times and all these dead tree publications are withering, and they're desperately trying to figure out what to do, and they're moving more in our direction. This is a device that they've got to be very happy about. Imagine a Scientific American where you can not only read the text of the magazine, but their podcasts are in there. There's video in there. I mean, this could be a wonderful experience for Scientific American. And cheaper, too, because there's no dead trees, trucks, or ink involved.
Right. And don't kid yourself, the costs of printing, now I come from the printing industry. That was my last career before I retired. And by the way, that industry was very, very, very worried about what was going to happen on this score. And I think it's inevitable that it will happen. But there will always be a printing industry. And the reason why is you will always buy colorful packaging cornflakes on your grocer's shelf. So packaging printing will exist from now on. And I think so will certain annual reports, maybe not. Maybe that'll go electronic too, but there will be some commercial printing that will still exist. But I think book printing publications and web printing will take a hit in the long run.
We were talking before the show began also about all the vertical possibilities. You talked as a pilot about how pilots might love this, medical people might love this. It strikes me now after having this conversation with you that Apple's motivation here may not have been consumers at all. I mean, I'm sure they try to cover everything, but this sounds like a device that in many industries are actually asking for. Many industries are actually asking for, especially the print media.
Right. The print media, it'll be, in my opinion, the ideal way to do electronic publishing. I can hold it in my lap, sit in it, sit with it in bed, whatever, read it comfortably where I wouldn't sit in front of my computer for. But now I want to be fair. I already only subscribe to Lynn's Works extended version, which comes on DVD.
Now, we've talked before about this. This is
black and white.
It's a black and white. It's a photo magazine, right?
It's a photo magazine, and it includes a color now, and the extended version. The print version is black and white only. But because it usually only takes me about an hour to sit down and consume it, I just buy the electronic version because for an hour, I can do that.
So you don't you read it in a browser?
Yeah, well,
or is it
no,
PDF?
You read it in PDF.
So
it's PDF, so you read it on with Acrobat.
And he uses some of these advanced features of Acrobat, these multimedia features, right?
Right. There are interviews, audio interviews. There are video interviews with photographers, how they do the work that they do. There are numerous portfolios in each issue. There are even some pictures in it that he gives you the privilege to print out if you would like to. And the beauty of PDF is he can control that. So individually, he can say this, he can turn on the privilege that you can print this, and no, you can't print this. This is copyrighted, and enjoy it on the screen. And
I'd be really curious what he thinks of the iPad and whether he's considering using it.
Well, maybe I'll have him on again as a guest because, in my opinion, he's one of the pioneers in this area of electronic publishing because he's already doing it.
I can just think all of the rich content opportunities, all of the educational opportunities. Right. I would far prefer. I have a stack of dead trees in my bedroom on the bedside table, and I would love to get rid of, and not just magazines, and newspapers, but catalogs, all that stuff.
Right.
If I could put this on a device that I could read, that it's all there, and I could read it when I want. I just think as a reader alone, this is a very compelling device, and that's just one of many functions.
Right.
To me, it's so exciting. It's such an exciting device, and I know people think that I've drunk the Kool-Aid and that I'm nuts, and a lot of people are very critical.
Right.
And I was perfectly prepared to say this is a crappy product, but after playing with it and seeing the use cases, I just am really excited about it, and I cannot wait to get. And by the way, I'm going to buy the cheap one.
Yeah.
I think 16 gigs of Wi-Fi, that's all I need for right now.
One of the things that ran through my mind is if Ford Sync has a Wi-Fi connection, brings a Wi-Fi connection to the car.
Oh, yeah, good point.
Now, I'm not talking about the driver. I'm talking about passengers and the kids in the back seat can still use still browse.
Well, what you're saying, which is true, is that Wi-Fi is everywhere and is going to be almost everywhere. And I even have the the MiFi from Verizon, then I can use that if I need Wi-Fi.
Now, the only downside is the Wi-Fi only version does not have a GPS, so the pilots will not be happy.
Right.
I mean, I will probably buy the 3G version, and I will either tether it to my iPhone, which I can do in Canada via Bluetooth, or if they give a sharing plan that I don't have to pay any more to, I can use so much data from either my iPhone or my iPad, then, that's what I would do. But I'm not interested in buying another subscription, for data at this point.
No. In fact, I for a long time, I really said there's no way Apple could do that. They did at least give you cut rate data, but who's going to add that additional cost?
Now, I've got a fair bit to cover on this. The title of this is going to be Monitor Your Color, because it's all going to be about color, RGB color, monitors, calibration, and so forth.
Great.
I want to throw in just a couple of more things before I dive into that, but I want to save some time for it. The other point that I wanted to make was I complained the other day about Epson, and they're not supporting professional printers that have their Epson 4000. And I just want to compare and contrast. I paid $2,000 for that printer, and I can't get a Snow Leopard compatible driver for it. However, at the same time when it started, they did not do a good job of doing black and white prints on the Epson printer. So I bought the shareware QuadToneRIP, which is an excellent, excellent RIP. And I paid the princely sum of $50 for it. All right, $50.
What is a RIP?
A RIP is a raster image processor. And oh boy, I don't want to go too deep into that.
Well, you can't just say RIP and not explain, but how would you use it? Just briefly, how would you use it?
Well, for most people, they can think of it as a driver, except that it will render text and certain things in the printing world that are described as shapes and described as vector art.
Okay.
It will do it at the resolution of the printer.
So it's just a fancy printer driver.
Yeah, it's a fancy printer driver. In the printing industry, you don't want to render text at the same resolution as you render your images. Like you've got a 300 dpi image, and that's fine for pictures. But if you want the serifs on text to show up and you have a 1440 dpi printer, keep in mind that's just black and white, there's no gray shades, then you want to take advantage of the full 1400 dpi to render the serifs on the text so that it's sharp. If you rasterize it at 300 dpi, you're losing a lot of the fine detail in vector items that are in a print file. So you can send a PDF file that has vector objects and raster objects in it, and a RIP will render them at the very high resolution of the printer. Whereas if you're, like when you're printing from Photoshop and you don't have a text layer in it, just a straight photo, all you want is 300 dpi because it takes a collection of dots in the printer to make one gray tone. Any rate, that's next week.
Okay.
Next week, I'm going to talk all about CMY color, and I'm going to talk about inkjet printers and the difference between RGB color and CMYK color. And next week is printers. Today,
so these really go hand in hand because there's two different ways that you reproduce color, basically.
Right, right. But today is monitors. We're just going to talk about reproducing accurate color on monitors and how we do it, and some of that sort of stuff.
Great.
But I just wanted to put in that little kick. That one other quick side note: I saw in the news the U.S. has passed a law that employers and insurance companies cannot discriminate based on genetic information.
Good. I'm safe.
Yep.
Because next month I'm giving George Church my entire genome and my phenotype.
Yep.
So I'm basically giving up all rights to privacy of my medical history and my potential medical flaws built into my genes.
Okay, I want to review real quickly something from last week, and that's the LAB color space. Last week, I talked about the CIE matching functions for the eye, and then I talked about the LAB color space, which comes from those matching functions. For the mathematical literate, if you take those matching functions and you integrate the amount of red, green, and blue energy under each one separately, you get a number, which we call X, Y, and Z. If you then take the X, Y, Z value, which is how much energy is in each one, remember the I is not linear, it's logarithmic. You put it through this special equation, you can create a LAB value, which is visually linear. What's that mean? That means that if I give you an L star value, L runs between 0 and 100. 0 is black, 100 is white. If I move 5 units from 0 to 5, I get the same visual change as 95 to 100. In other words, it's a visually linear space, LAB space. And by the way, that is the exchange space for changing from one color device to another. And you can actually work in LAB in the Photoshop. I'm not going to go into that today, and I don't recommend it. Work in RGB and then switch to CMYK for certain printing applications. But under the hood, everything is done in LAB in Photoshop when you convert from one device to another. So once again, let's just review LAB. L or L star is when they talk about the individual value, is luminance, the brightness or whiteness. Those don't mean exactly the same thing to a color scientist. But black is 0, 100 is white. Then there is the A-star value, which if it's a positive value is magenta. If it is a negative value, it is green. If it is 0, it is, if A and B are 0, it's gray. Okay, so the grays just have an L-star value with 0, 0 as the A-star and B-star. And then in the B-star, plus B is yellow, minus B is blue. Okay, so that's just a review from last week's show where we went into that in more detail. But now let's go back in the beginning.
Oh, boy. We're going all the way back to the beginning.
We're going back to the beginning of computers and color.
Okay.
Now, I have also mentioned that in the early days, or not in the early days, now, today, in the video world, it is output referenced. All video production studios assume that everyone in the world has a standard television, and they actually sell standard monitors. And all the color correction and everything in a television studio is done to these standards. Whether your television is calibrated to that standard is another question, but that's the way they work. Now, in the early days of computing, they made some of the same assumptions. When Microsoft in particular and Apple in the early days, the Apple II days, made the assumption that all color monitors were alike, that all scanners were alike, that all cameras were alike, that all printers were alike, and they all reproduced the same color space in the same way, etc. Now, if you studied any of these things, that's absurd. And if you played in the early days and tried to print out color, you found out that no way. You know, you'd have one color on the monitor, and then you'd print it out, and, you know, if it was even in the ballpark, you were lucky. And some of the early color only used 16 bits, and then later 8 bits for all, you know, there were only 256 colors in the image. And then finally, when memory became cheaper and so forth, we went to 24-bit color. And now we have 16-bit color, which, you know, is 16 bits per channel. So that's 16 bits times 3 RGB. And again, because memory's cheap and we can do it. But it gives much smoother transitions as we go through the color space. The other historical note that I want to point out is that Apple, when they came on the scene and they brought out the laser printer to get the image on the screen to match what printed on the laser printer, a property of the laser printer, they chose to choose a gamma of 1.8 for their monitors. And until Snow Leopard, they stayed with that. Now, nobody in the graphics industry likes to work in a gamma of 1.8. So let's back up and explain what gamma is now. Gamma is a compression, if you will, to again make the numbers in a file describing a picture linear with regard to your visual perception. It has to be linear perceptually, not energy-wise. Now, I'm going to sidetrack for a moment and say that a camera, the chip in a camera, is linear with regard to energy. So if you double the light, it doubles the number that you get out of it. And each time you double is increasing one stop in a f-stop or shutter speed in a camera. So the digital cameras put out a linear, the chips put out a linear with regard to energy. That is not perceptually linear. If you took data direct from the camera chip and sent it to your monitor, it would be all crowded into all the information is crowded into the blacks, and the highlights have tons of detail. They're stretched over the majority of the capabilities of your monitor. But in other words, all your blacks would be crammed together. So inside your camera, if you output JPEG, it puts in a gamma number to uncompress those blacks and make them visually linear. And most cameras today, most editing spaces like sRGB, Adobe 98, they have a gamma of 2.2, and a color space with a gamma of 2.2 means that a middle gray comes out somewhere around 128, going from 0 to 256. So the shadows and stuff are opened up, and you can see detail in the shadows. Because if you took the numbers right out of the chip, it would be all crammed up. Now, like I say, recently they have gone to a gamma of 1.8. Now, that's what Apple did when it first started, and Windows and Hewlett-Packard and some of the others made the assumption. They came out with a color space called sRGB. And they said, we will assume that all monitors in the world are sRGB. Well, once again, that's not true, particularly since we've gone to LCD monitors and whatnot. And Apple, on the other hand, got together with a bunch of other manufacturers, and these other manufacturers formed an organization called the International Color Consortium. And they developed a standard way to describe the color that an individual device can reproduce, and it's called an ICC profile. And in Apple's case, when they started using ICC profiles, they came out with ColorSync. And ColorSync was the first attempt to be able to reproduce color accurately on a computer. So let's imagine right now that you have today an application on your computer and that it does not recognize ICC profiles. And if you don't, what it does is it takes the RGB values that are inside a file, no matter what color space they're in, and it sends those RGB values directly to your monitor, and we just hope for the best. That's an uncolor managed system. And there's still millions of computers that's how they work, and most of the applications on the Windows product, that's the way they work, including Internet Explorer. It just takes RGB values in your web page, sends them to your monitor, and that's that. Firefox and Safari, and there's a few other browsers now. They are all what are called color management aware. So how do they do this differently? What they do is, first of all, you try and you calibrate your screen with the colorimeter. The one I use is a X-Rite, the X-Rite i1 display Model 2. There are a number of there's a number of other people who make colorimeters, which are relatively to spectrophotometers inexpensive devices. They're about $250. And if you are a serious amateur or a professional photographer, certainly it's a must-have. You must have one of these and calibrate your monitor. For one thing, your monitor will drift over time. So, you're gonna want to do this. I'm curious, Leo, do you have a calibrator? Any rate, I want to point out that what a profile is now. What you do is you put this calibrator on your monitor, and then you output RGB values to your monitor, and you read back the LAB, the actual color that you get out of your monitor. And you go through a whole bunch of possible colors, and you take all these numbers that you've collected, and you put it into a map that maps those RGB values to LAB values. Now, keep in mind that LAB is a model of human perception. So it's the real color. That's the real way to measure what color you're getting out of your monitor, is in LAB numbers. So imagine that I have a calibrated monitor, and I make a file, and I put it in a known color space like sRGB or Adobe 98. By the way, if you want to send to the biggest audience on the web, you'd probably put your web pictures in sRGB. And it has a gamma of 2.2. So I would put that tag in the file, the JPEG file that goes on my web page. I'd put in an ICC tag. Photoshop will do this automatically if you set up your preferences properly. And it goes out to the web. When a person opens it, and if it's color managed, it will look at the tag, and it will take every RGB value that's in the file, and it will run it through this profile, and it will map it to LAB. After it has mapped the value to LAB, it will then look at your custom monitor profile, and it will enter that profile with an LAB value saying, I want this color to appear on this man's screen, and it will then output the RGB value for your specific monitor that gives you that LAB color. So you have two profiles. You have the profile that's in the file, and you have your custom monitor profile. So the RGB values in the file go into the first profile and come out LAB. This now tells me what color I want on the monitor. Then I have my custom monitor profile that I input LAB values, and out comes RGB values for my specific monitor that will make it produce that LAB value. So that's how you have the potential of getting correct color on the web. Now,
Potential, unfortunately. Yeah.
Potential. Now, what everybody asked me said, well, but Ray, if you put a profile in there and what if they aren't color managed, doesn't it make it worse? The answer is no. If you go to sRGB, which everybody has agreed is the standard for the web, if it doesn't look at the profile, it's going to send those sRGB values direct to your monitor. And, you know, that's the best you can do if they don't have a calibrated monitor. And at least you're going to be sending consistent files, properly calibrated, out to your clients or your customers. At least it's not going to change from your end. You've eliminated half of the variability if you're doing this. And putting in a tag does not make the situation worse. Now, Leo, if you want to test your browser to see if it works, go to color.org.
All right. I'm going to do it with Firefox because I bet I'm going to guess that Safari does a better job. But let's see. Okay, Firefox, color.org.
Yep.
Okay.
And then on the right, whoops, let me get this up so I'll pull it up here.
Of course, everybody's going to color.org right now, so we're probably going to break it.
Yeah, we'll probably break it. And on the right-hand side, I'm not getting it now. We brought it down.
I'm looking at the links here. You can look on your screen. What is an ICC profile, ICC version? Is your system V4 ready? Is that the one you want?
Yeah, click on that.
Okay.
Quick.
Quick. Don't all you do it yet.
Please don't do it.
Oh. So is it going to pull up a color chart?
It's going to pull up a paragraph, and then there's another place to click.
Oh, we're never getting there.
No, I blew that. I should have sent it to you.
Here we go.
Yeah.
Here's a paragraph.
In the
now
top
here's the simple.
paragraph,
Should I do HTML or PDF?
HTML.
Okay. And here we go. Let's see if I'm ahead of these guys.
Yeah, if we can keep you one step ahead.
One step ahead. Yeah, you should whisper it. Don't just whisper it into my ear.
I'm sorry.
No, and of course the ICC site is going, what the hell? Our server logs just banged. What's going on here? It's coming. It's just slow.
What it will do is it will bring up a picture that is divided into 4 segments. And those 4 segments, if they all look similar color, means that your browser is ICC compliant and is correcting properly. It's looking at the tag that's in the file. If some of the quadrants are not the correct color, and I mean they'll be way off, there's no, it's not a subtle thing, then you will know that your browser is not ICC compliant.
Svakatka.
Yeah. And there you are. But
it's not loading. We broke it.
We broke it. We brought the server right to its knees.
Unless it's supposed to be a 30% gray, I think.
Yeah. No, I blew it. I should have emailed it. I should have said, look in the show notes, and because it's in there, and I blew it.
It's funny that that's funny because that they wouldn't have that much capacity. I mean, I'm sure we didn't send more than a few thousand people there. Just shows you know. Hey, I'm the last person to complain. We melted our servers down yesterday. Ustream and BitGravity did just fine with the Apple announcement. We sent hundreds of thousands of people to those servers. The problem was they had to go through our server to get there, and our server went.
Oh my!
Yeah, it's not coming up. So, but I would see as you're listening to this podcast later, you can safely go.
As you listen to it later, you can go to this place and you can test out, and you will see whether or not you have a compliant. But if you do, now there's another thing. Everybody asks me, well, gee, Ray, isn't Adobe 98 a larger color space? Or what about ProPhoto? It's a gigantic color space. Why don't I use that on the web? And the reason why is because the majority of people are not color managed. You can use any of those if you have a calibrated monitor and you have an application that is ICC aware, there's no problem. You can use any color space you like, and you will get the correct color displayed. But since the majority of people out there are not color managed or not calibrated, you're best to use sRGB on the web. Now, the next question I get in these, by the way, let me just say one more time, I'm talking about editing color spaces. They are artificial color spaces. You can select them in Photoshop and say in Adobe Camera Raw. When you bring in a raw image, you can map it into sRGB, Adobe 98, or ProPhoto. And I have a lot of, especially professional photographers say, well, don't I want to use ProPhoto? You know, it's a gigantic color space. And I tell them not necessarily. Depends on what you're doing. ProPhoto is the largest color space, but unless you are photographing butterflies with iridescent, super-saturated colored wings, you're probably not going to make use of that color space. And if you use 8-bit ProPhoto, you don't have enough quantization values. You only have 256 quantization values. So if you're taking a scene, now I'm going to do this in one dimension. Imagine that you have a brightness scale that goes from 0 to 256. And imagine you have a bigger brightness scale and a smaller brightness scale. Well, if your scene only occupies the smaller brightness range, you'll get more fine graduations in the smaller space than the bigger space. If you have this bigger color space and all your colors down in the bottom of it, you won't have any numbers greater than 128, let's say. So you've cut your smoothness or resolution of your fine color tones in half. So if you go to ProPhoto, you really must go to 16-bit ProPhoto. For goodness sakes, don't use 8-bit ProPhoto, because all your values, unless you have super saturated colors, are all going to be down in the very low end of the range.
I remember asking you, though, this when I guess it was Lightroom, that I had the choice of sRGB, Adobe RGB, and I guess the Pro. And
right.
And maybe it wasn't you, but I remember asking this question. I guess, it was when I was in Tasmania, and everybody said, oh, just use sRGB.
Yeah. Well,
why?
If you're going to the web, use sRGB for sure.
Because that's the standard.
Yeah, that's the standard. However, for printing on a wide gamut color printer, a modern, good color printer, I use Adobe 98. And there are some color printers that can reproduce colors that are a little beyond the edge of Adobe 98. Like, for instance, Michael Reichman is a ProPhoto fan when he's reproducing color with high-end printers, and he has pictures of butterflies and saturated wings. But even then, that ProPhoto color space is way bigger than the printer can reproduce. So again, you are spreading unless you're using those high numbers and have super saturated colors, which most color reproducing systems, your monitor certainly can't reproduce those colors. And by the way, if you use ProPhoto and you bring it up in Photoshop on your monitor can't reproduce your colors. You're just going to see a very saturated red or green or blue or whatever, but you're not going to see the true color that's stored in the ProPhoto file. So what you want is you want to use a color space that is as close to the output device that you're aimed at as possible. And in most cases, most commercial photographers will tell you to use the Adobe 98 with most inkjet printers today. It will, and particularly unless you've got some super saturated colors, there may be some commercial photographers that do high-end ads that have super saturated colors in them. They might want to use ProPhoto. But again, if they're sending their files to a magazine, for instance, that follows SWAP standards, Adobe is fine, because what a typical color magazine can reproduce in the way of a color gamut is more limited than your inkjet printer. Your inkjet printer can produce a larger color gamut than the typical magazine printer, unless it's, one of these high-end magazines that's using some special techniques or something, and stochastic screening and high-density inks and whatnot. But if they are sending files to a typical magazine that follows the specification for web offset publications, there's no need to work in ProPhoto at all. Adobe 98 is more than adequate, and then map it into CMYK properly and do your final tweaks in CMYK.
Is there a printer that uses ProPhoto?
No. There's no printer on earth that can reproduce the full ProPhoto gamut. Not even close. It can't even produce half the volume of ProPhoto.
And of course, this leads to that conversation that we had about the Sharp RGBY television that we saw at CES, which did, in fact, have a broader gamut.
Yeah.
But since the standard, just like sRGB, the standard was a narrower gamut, and everything's produced to that standard, you don't want that.
All you can do with that is you can turn the saturation way up on your set and see all these garish colors.
Great.
But that's not what the originator's sending.
Right.
And that's not what he intends you to see.
Right.
If you want the director's cut, then you need to calibrate your monitor to the standard. And there are people that can do that. You can buy discs that'll do that and whatnot. So, yeah, precisely. But the other question I get asked again by the professionals is, well, shouldn't I store my images in ProPhoto? Because someday there might be a reproduction method that can handle this big color gamut. And I say, well, what's wrong with storing the raw file, which at any time in the future you can map to that wide color gamut? Because let me point this out, and this is going to throw everybody for a loop. Cameras don't have color gamuts.
Wait a minute. Now you're teasing me.
I'm going to do a whole show on characterizing cameras. They don't. I can demonstrate it right here in front of God and everybody. You see this color camera in front of me? You see this remote controller that puts out infrared? Okay, can you see that? I can't see it with my eye. So that camera can reproduce or can react to stuff outside the visual reference. So that camera can take in an enormous color gamut. All right? But that doesn't mean it's going to map it to a real color that can be reproduced.
Right, because it didn't look red or anything. It just looked kind of gray.
Yeah, look at that.
Didn't have a color at all.
And if I use a different monitor or a different one, you get
That's
different.
purple. That one's purple. Yeah.
Yeah. And I just turned the sound on my TV by accident.
You got to be careful with those remotes. They do stuff.
Yeah, they do things. Again, I'm going to dedicate a show to that. And up behind me here, I have the new X-Rite Color Passport and the software for it that allows you to profile your own camera because they vary from unit to unit, even if you have the same brand. Your 5D Mark II may not reproduce color exactly the way mine does, but now I've got a $130 package that can profile my camera, and I'm going to do a show on that and do a review of it and explain what it does, when to use it, when not to use it, and so forth. But just to point us towards future shows, the next show is going to be all about printers, how they work, the screening they use, and CMYK color. And why did they use CMYK to reproduce on a printer when they use RGB on a monitor? And I'm going to go through that in detail. And then the show after that, I'm going to talk about cameras and scanners and how they input color and how you need to profile them. But I don't use an ICC profile for my camera. I use an Adobe Camera Raw profile for my camera, and there's a reason for that. And I bow at the altar of the Knoll brothers, and I guess it's John Knoll, isn't it, that's still with that?
I can't remember which Knoll. I always get confused. Yeah.
But he's come up with a method to deal with profiling your camera and still be able to create a profile that you can use with any kind of lighting. Because if you use an ICC profile, it's only good for one lighting setup. And, there you are.
I have reloaded this color.org picture, by the way, several times. Good. Well, I'm getting 3 out of the 4 quadrants.
Oh, okay.
I don't know what the other. Now, the GBR, I don't even know what that is, and Adobe RGB look exactly the same. The ESRGB does not look the same.
Yeah. So, well, if you use Safari,
this is Firefox. So
yeah, Firefox 3.5 and newer,
which this is. Yeah,
is color aware, and on both Windows and Mac, and of course Safari is Mac only, but Internet Explorer, as far as I know, is not. Now the other
Isn't that
thing
funny?
is,
So it's not just the OS; it's also the software that you're running that
right.
makes a difference.
Well, let me tell you the difference. Let's talk about that for a moment. One of the differences and one of the reasons that I'm a Mac fan is because, one, Apple adopted color management way before Windows did. And so I, needed it in my line of work. And number two, to this day, it is more integrated at a systems level in the Mac OS than it is in the Windows. Windows has color support, color management support, but it isn't, I don't know how to put this, the API isn't as readily available as it is in the Mac, as I understand it. I used to write Mac software, but I haven't written any recently, and a lot of that has changed. But Windows they have the concept of a monitor profile, and they have a place to store that monitor profile, but it's up to the application writer to go and get that monitor profile and do the color management at an application level. And they have some APIs that support certain primitives. But Apple has a whole slug of primitives in their API, and it's very easy to write a color-managed application. And a few simple calls, and bingo, your image is color-managed. So it's easier, and there are certainly far more applications that are color-aware. I often give talks at some of the camera clubs, and they all have projectors. And by and large, they use Windows computers, and I can't remember the name of it. They have a presentation program that everybody puts their slideshows together in. And as near as I can tell, it is not color management aware. And they really have problems when they go from projector to projector getting the same color. But if they were using a Mac and using, PDF or the other presentation programs to put shows together and add music and all that. And by the way, PDF and Acrobat are color management aware on both platforms. And if they were using those, then they could get they make a calibrator that allows you to calibrate projectors. And so you could calibrate your projector, and then you could put all your files in a standard editing space, sRGB or Adobe 98, and they would project the same no matter,
Okay,
on what day or what.
I finally got this picture in Firefox. That is definitely not supporting. That's exactly what it's not supposed to look like, right?
That's correct. That's correct. So it may not be turned on in yours. I thought it was
So
on.
you could turn it on.
Yeah, I thought it was defaulted to on now after 3.5, but I may be wrong.
This is 3.6 in
Now,
on a Mac even.
Okay, the early, that's interesting because mine works on a Mac. And I didn't, you know what? I did. I went in.
You customized that son of a gun.
You have to go in. I think, no, it's not terminal. You go into
because here's Safari. Look at this. This is perfect.
There you go.
Safari is exactly what you want. Yeah.
Right. That's the way it looks on Safari. And that means that browser is color management aware.
So that means I should pretty much, if I'm looking at a catalog or anywhere where color is important, I should use Safari.
Right. Now let me see if I can bring up another illustration because I may be a guest shortly on. Hang on a minute. I'm not going to say anything here. I'll give this away.
No secrets. Reveal nothing.
Yes, exactly.
Apparently, if you open the page as a PDF, MechMan is saying in our chat room, even with Firefox it works. But of course, that's because PDF is rendering it.
Yes.
Not Firefox. So what we want to do is figure out how to get Firefox to do the right thing with the color profiles.
Right. Early versions of Firefox had it, but you had to do some very low-level stuff to turn it on. And I remember you went into a library file and you changed some of the preferences with a text editor.
Fopo Gigio tells me that you do that about :config trick with Firefox, or rather, you know that one, and that gives you if you enter about :config, that gives you a whole bunch of. It says this might void your warranty. I'll be careful, I promise. And then it gives you a whole bunch of settings, and then he says that it's gfx.color_management enabled.
Right.
So you can search for that, gfx. And that'll give you all the GFX settings.
Right.
And then you, well, that doesn't render very well, but color management mode. And let me just see what he says again. Color management. And see, I don't see, it's either rendering intent. So I have to figure out what the mode should be. Right now it's mode 2.
Yes, I did do that early on in Firefox on mine.
Isn't that interesting?
To turn it on, and I can't remember the details.
The default is not to have it on.
Yeah.
Then they say that's because they don't want to surprise anybody, I guess.
Right. But having it on again doesn't do any harm. If the person has a tag in their file, it honors it and gives you good color. If they don't include a tag, it just sends the RGB values directly through and doesn't bother with it. So it doesn't. What I'm saying is turning on color management or including tags in your files for color management, they never hurts anything. And there's a myth out there that that can make things worse, and it's not true. Because if you put it in the RGB space, and let's say the person's monitor happens to work correctly with RGB,
right,
and you have the tag in it and it doesn't look at it, bingo, you get the right color by accident. On the other hand, if you have a monitor profile and have done the proper calibration, it goes through and gives you the proper color as well. So, it's never hurts anything to include the, the profile, and it also never hurts anything to turn on color management. And if the file doesn't, like even in Photoshop, if I get a file that doesn't have a tag and tell me what color space it's in, the first thing Photoshop does, the way I have it set up, now you have to set this in the preferences, is it comes up and says, hey, this has no tag, Ray. What color space do you want to open this in? And then I open it in my working color space, which is nominally Adobe 98, and then I color correct it and put it into Adobe 98 color space properly corrected. So, but that's what we are up to.
It's really interesting. I think it's something I don't think people really think about very much. Is just assume that, well, I'm going to assume that it's all working right. Why wouldn't it?
Right.
Because we don't know that there is issues. There are issues involved.
Yeah. Well, the truth of the matter is the monitors are getting more alike and more consistent. My LED monitor, every time I go to calibrate it, there's very, very little drift in it. versus my fluorescent LCDs and my CRTs. My CRTs, you could see them die over the years. I mean, if you used one for 3 or 4 years, you could see the thing die. The color gamut gets smaller. You could see the luminance drop. You know, it was real important to use a calibrator on a CRT in any kind of critical color work.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, I'm hoping that someone will come out. There was a company that tried, wasn't too successful. They tried to build a calibrator into the monitor that worked automatically, and it did keep it consistent, but it didn't necessarily calibrate it accurately. So you know, it was a step.
You're saying in lieu of using a colorimeter or something like that?
Yeah. They had a built-in kind of colorimeter. It really wasn't a full-blown one.
By the way, here's what Chrome on the Macintosh looks like.
There you go. It's
Perfect.
It's color management aware.
Perfect.
Yeah.
That's Chrome 4 on the Macintosh. So
yeah. Google
does it right.
Right.
Safari does it right. Of course, they're both based on WebKit, so it's probably just that WebKit does it right.
Yeah. So,
Great subject. I really appreciate the information. And do you recommend, I guess you probably do, that people go get a colorimeter and...
Absolutely. If you're a serious photographer, or certainly if you're a professional, the bare minimum is a colorimeter.
And
now,
what do you recommend? Is a spider okay?
I prefer, and from everything I've read, I prefer the X-Rite i1 display Model 2.
How much is that going to be?
It's around $250 US. Yeah.
Okay, so the spider's about $100, but you get what you pay for it. If this is your business,
right? If you're
spend
serious, if you're going to spend $3,000 or $4,000 on a 5D Mark II and then buy some lenses,
I guess I better be going to buy one of those things. The good news is it can calibrate multiple monitors.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right. Now, let me just say this as a wrap up. Calibrating your monitor, following the instructions, doing it absolutely precisely will not make, and even if you get a spectrophotometer and calibrate your printer as well, you will not get an absolutely perfect match between the monitor and printer. They're different devices that produce color in a different way. You'll get them very close. And if you enclose them both in a 5,000 Kelvin viewing booth and you paint the walls gray and you wear a black shirt when you use them and you darken the room and a whole bunch of things, you can get them extremely close. Mm-hmm. But what is important with the calibration is that your monitor isn't changing and gray is gray and a few things like that, so that you're at least in the ballpark. And then when you start printing, you'll learn, when I see this on the screen, I see a slight shift this way or that way with my printer, and I allow for it. I'm giving you the inexpensive way of living with this. But what's key is calibrating once a month will keep your monitor consistent. And consistent is more important than accurate.
Well, we all know that. Ray, thank you. Great information. One more question from our chat room. Icon has asked me several times to ask you if you know about something called a color monkey.
Yes, the Color Monkey is the lowest cost spectrophotometer made by X-Rite. It's getting good reviews, and I think I can recommend it. And if you need to do more accurate monitor calibrations and do printer calibrations, and I think it will do projector calibrations as well, the Color Monkey is the way to go. It's around $500, and it's least expensive configuration. There are more expensive ones.
So you said it's a spectrophotometer, so it would be for reflective. It would be for printed materials, not for your screen.
Both. It will do transmit. Yep, it'll do transmissive and reflective.
So it sounds like
even a projector. You can aim it at a projector screen.
Sounds like this is the right thing to get because it does both.
Yes.
And you can calibrate your whole chain.
Well, what I'm saying is the colorimeter is the minimum for any serious amateur. I will next week talk about the canned profiles for printers, which are very good today. And if you can't afford the $500 thing or whatever, you can get by with the $250 colorimeter.
And then just use an existing profile as opposed to making your own.
The other thing is I used to make profiles with $10,000 equipment. And to make a really excellent proofing profile that made an inkjet printer exactly emulate a printer precisely in a 5,000 degree Kelvin booth and all that, took me 1 to 2 months per profile.
Wow. Wow.
Okay.
So I don't think forget the cost of the device. What about your time?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So the can profiles made by a professional at the printing company, sometimes it depends on the opinions. Again, Michael Reichman, he uses a spectrophotometer, makes his own profiles. And so does the other person is, of course, Bill Atkinson. But Bill Atkinson is a color scientist, par excellence.
Was he that when he was writing the back paint for the Macintosh, the black and white Macintosh, or did that come later?
That came later. He was studying it. He certainly had the background for it, being a neuroscientist.
That's right. Yeah.
Color is all about neuroscience, and he was a PhD in neuroscience before he started it at Apple.
Ray Maxwell, thank you so much.
All right.
Fascinating subject. Next week, on to spectrophotometers.
Right. On to Dr. Kiki.
And on to Dr. Kiki. You can watch Maxwell's House when we do it live every Thursday afternoon from 5 to 6 p.m. Eastern. That's 2 to 3 p.m. Pacific. That would be 2000 to 2100 UTC at live.twit.tv. And subscribe to the podcast on iTunes or the Zune store, or just go to twit.tv/MH for the latest episode and links to subscribe to Maxwell's House. Thanks, Ray. We'll polymath you later.
All right. Bye for now, Leo.
Bye-bye.